So I want to talk about something that I think a lot of us do without even realizing it. We make life harder than it needs to be and then feel guilty when we find an easier way. This came to mind as I was walking today and- because I think a lot of us still confuse making things easier with being lazy. But I think we've confused unnecessary struggle with discipline. Somewhere along the way, we started treating struggle like it was proof that we're doing life correctly. If something is difficult, time consuming, or exhausting, then it must be worthwhile. And if we find a faster or easier way to do it, we sometimes feel like that we're cheating or we're just being lazy. But simplifying your life is not about lowering your standards. It's about removing the unnecessary friction that keeps you from consistently meeting your goals. Since I'm already out here, I figured this was as good a time as any to talk about it. And honestly, the more responsibilities I've taken on, the more I've realized that making everything harder than it needs to be isn't a sign of discipline. Sometimes it's just a bad system. So, today I want to talk about the difference between simplifying your life and avoiding effort because those are not the same thing. Simple does not mean careless, it does not mean unambitious, and it definitely doesn't mean lazy. So I'm not trying to remove all effort from my life. Some things are supposed to require effort. Training requires effort. Building business requires effort. Creating quality content requires effort. Maintaining relationships, managing your finances, your health, and following through on long term goals, those all require effort. The goal is not to avoid hard work. The goal is to stop spending hard work on things that don't deserve it. For me, simplifying means asking a few basic questions. Does this step actually add value? Does this need to be done does this way? And does it need to be done by me? And does it need to be done at all? That's not lowering standards. It's being more intentional about where my energy goes. One of the reasons simplifying can feel uncomfortable is that unnecessary friction disguises our standards. We assume that complicated processes must produce a better result. We assume that doing everything ourselves means we care more. We assume that repeating meals is boring and owning fewer clothes limits us, or that using convenience somehow means we're cutting corners. But complicated doesn't automatically mean better. I have very high standards for what my life should look like, and I care about my health, my home, my work, my content, my finances, and the people I love. But having high standards in every area does not mean that every task inside those areas needs to be complicated. The standard is the result. The process is allowed to be simple. A good example is my capsule wardrobe. So, having fewer clothes doesn't mean I care less about how I look. It means I want the clothes that I actually love to be easier to see, easier to combine, and easier to wear. So, removing the clothing that doesn't fit or flatter or doesn't coordinate it or never doesn't get worn. It just doesn't lower my standards. It creates a higher standard for what remains. My capsule wardrobe is not giving up on style. It's about making the clothes I actually love easier to wear. Meal planning is another area. I live in a household where different people had different calorie and nutritional goals. We have different foods, choices, we have different schedules. I could cook completely different meals for everyone, but that would take so much more time, create more cleanup, and increase more food waste. And it would make it harder for me to stay consistent. Instead, I just create one thing and adjust the portions. Making one adaptable meal instead of three completely separate meals is not doing less for my family. It's about building a system that I can actually keep doing for my family and then, like grocery delivery, I could spend a couple of hours driving every week to the store, walking every aisle, waiting in line, loading the car, unloading everything when I got home. But the physical act of me pushing a cart doesn't make the groceries healthier and it doesn't make the food taste better. And just because I didn't walk through the grocery store and I used delivery, it doesn't make me lazy. It means that I gave that time back and I can spend my time with family or handle something that truly requires my attention. Same idea applies to outsourcing some of like my video editing. Outsourcing doesn't mean that I'm incapable of doing the work myself. It means that I've decided that planning, filming, and building the larger vision for my channel are often what's best for me. This works in my time. Like this week, I'm editing my own videos because circumstances changed and my son needed that time, and that's fine. A good system should be able to flex without completely falling apart. Simplifying doesn't mean that I become incapable of doing things myself. It means that I don't automatically do everything myself, and that's not the best use of my time. Good simplification is not random. It requires knowing what outcome you actually want. And sometimes the simplest system takes effort to build at the beginning. You may need to declutter the closet, create a meal planning routine, organize your calendar, build a template, automate a payment, or make a decision about what you will no longer do. That setup work matters because it keeps from paying for the same problem over and over again. I would rather spend an hour building a system than spend 20 minutes fighting the same problem every day or every week. A simple system may take effort to build, but its job is to keep changing you and charging that effort only once. Of course, there's a difference between simplifying and avoiding. So when I'm deciding whether I'm making something easier in a useful way, I ask myself a few questions. First, am I removing unnecessary effort or am I avoiding necessary effort? Choosing a shorter workout still supports the goal that may be simplification, but repeatedly skipping training because it feels uncomfortable, that's avoidance. Second, does this make it the desired outcome easier to repeat? A useful system should improve consistency. It should make the right action more realistic on busy, tired, or imperfect days. Third, am I preserving the result that matters? If the result suffers, I may be cutting the wrong thing. But if the result stays the same or actually improves, the old complication may never have been necessary. And finally, will this create more work later? Some shortcuts remove friction, others simply push it back and send it back with interest. For me, the real goal of simplifying is reliable follow through. I don't need a life that looks impressively complicated from the outside. I need a system that actually supports the life I want to live. The best routines are necessarily the most, not necessarily the most elaborate. They're the ones that continuously work when you're tired, your schedule's interrupted, or you're just busy. A system is not successful because it looks disciplined. It's successful because you can still do it on a difficult Tuesday. Simplicity creates capacity. It gives me more energy for family, more consistency with my health, more room for creative work, less mental clutter, and a better chance of actually following through on the things that I say matter to me. I'm not simplifying my life because I want less from it. I'm simplifying because I want enough time, energy, and attention for the things that I want most. Simple doesn't mean careless. It doesn't mean unambitious, and it definitely doesn't mean lazy. It means being intentional with where your effort goes and removing the friction that keeps you from following through. So this week, take a look at one of the areas in your life that feel harder than it needs to be and ask yourself, is all of this effort actually improving the outcome, or have I simply gotten used to the way of doing something the hard way? Let me know in the comments what is one thing you have simplified or want to simplify in your life. And if you're working towards a simpler, more intentional life, subscribe and follow along because that's what we're building here at Prep Simplify Thrive. I'm Karen. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.